Hello and welcome to this video series entitled Life in Abundance as Proclaimed by a Universal Christ. I'm Father John Weckend, a retired diocesan priest of the Archdiocese of Regina. First of all, a little bit about my background. I'm a Saskatchewan boy, born in Broadview and raised mostly in Regina, where I attended elementary and high school. And like a lot of people from this province, I also bleed green for the Rough Riders. I came from a fairly traditional Catholic family and went through all the usual requirements which the church demanded of us as I was growing up at that time. Regular attendance at Sunday Mass, receiving the sacraments, learning all the devotional prayers, and basically trying to stay out of trouble. And then ultimately, for some strange reason, I felt a call to the priesthood. I entered St. Augustine Seminary in Toronto during the last days of the Second Vatican Council and spent a great part of my formation in its immediate aftermath. The 1960s were a time of great social upheaval both in the church and society in general. To quote Charles Dickens, it was the best of times, it was also the worst of times. For example, the Latin that I had learned as an altar server and had to study in high school was replaced by the English vernacular in the Mass. Catholics were beginning to rediscover the Bible and were being educated in issues of social justice and how they were connected with our faith. On the other hand, priests that I knew were leaving the active ministry, many to get married, leaving many of us in a state of confusion as to where the church was going. And all we heard on the news in the evening was the latest casualty rate from the Vietnam War, which seemed to drag on and on. The times were certainly a-changing, to paraphrase a Bob Dylan song of that era. It felt, as the gospel says, like we were trying to pour new wine into old wineskins. It was hopeful, but it was also painful. So, looking back over the last decade since the council, I've personally felt a need to express and share something of my own thoughts on faith and life and spirituality. Now, to be clear, I'm not a published author, a theological scholar, or lecturer. This endeavor simply comes from what I gleaned from my readings, my prayer life, my Catholic upbringing, and my experiences of ministry as a priest for over 50 years. It comes from the people also that I have encountered in the parishes that I've served, celebrating events like baptisms, weddings, funerals, confessions over a lifetime. Basically, this series is somewhat of a synthesis of my thoughts in relation to my faith in God, Jesus, and the church tradition which I inherited and hopefully cultivated over a lifetime. These thoughts are not the final word because faith, like life itself, is an ever-growing and evolving entity. As one writer put it, we as human beings are all unfinished symphonies. However, they are a snapshot of where I am as I enter the fourth quarter of my life, to use the length of a football game as an analogy. The theme of these sharings, Life in Abundance, came from a book of the same name written many years ago by Father Francis Bauer, Franciscan, who I had as a professor at the Franciscan School of Theology in Berkeley, California, when I was on a sabbatical leave. He awakened in me a broader aspect of faith which I hadn't considered before. In more recent years, another Franciscan, Father Richard Rohr, in his book, The Universal Christ, further whetted my thirst to seek a deeper and wider dimension of my faith. And these, in turn, led me to other writers and authors, spiritual writers like Sister Ilia Delio, Brian McLaren, and Father Thomas Berry. And not to leave the Jesuits out, having attended a Jesuit-run high school myself, I have been reintroduced to the writings of the Jesuit paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and the delightful and thought-provoking homilies and stories of Father Anthony de Mello, S.J. My hope is that something of my faith journey and those who have influenced it may perhaps open a new vista for you and for others in which to understand and live a faith which a risen Christ brings to us. My desire is to explore new directions and to better relate faith to life and life to faith. In other words, to respond to the question, where is God in all of this? And help heal the disconnect which I feel many Catholics are experiencing in that area these days. And so in this series of casual presentations, I invite you to journey with me over these next weeks as we explore life in abundance as proclaimed by a universal Christ.